Good evening, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving. As you can see behind me, the boss of the house has been at a little bit of decorating. She has not had time to do a video for it like she did last year because this house is crawling with little diseased children all the time. So anyway, I had a viewer request to do a video on the tools I'm using or have used for this build, so I thought, the weather's really nasty out tonight. Don't really, not a good night to be working out there in that wind and stuff. So hopefully we have plenty of time this weekend. I'm really hoping just about finished closing that thing in. So what we're going to do is, instead of sitting here and talking at you and just holding up a bunch of tools one at a time, and then one big tool sitting here talking at you, I'm going to go through a bunch of video clips where we have actually used each individual tool we discuss. I will discuss with you which ones you really have to have and which ones you can do without or substitute with. I will try to get you guys some links to the tools in the description below. So let's see what happens. Now mind you, I'll put the links in, but you don't have to buy them through there. Shop around. It's always a good idea to shop around. You might find a better price than what I found. So anyway, without further ado, here we go. I'm going to start with most important and work down to things you don't really need, but they do make the job easier. So the first tool out of the gate is going to be our timber framing chisels. You have a lot of options for timber framing chisels, but I highly recommend, if you are using chisels, you're going to be using chisels, I shouldn't say if. You're going to be using chisels in your build. You're going to use them every day. You're going to beat the hell out of these things. You're going to take a beautiful tool with a razor sharp edge, and you're going to be pounding the hell out of that thing with a mallet all the time. Reason I'm telling you that is, get a good one. You know, if you're going to spend the money on anything, spend it on your chisels. And they're not terribly expensive for what they are. The chisels I'm using, I think, are about $140 a piece, something like that. And they're Henry Taylor chisels, are the ones that you guys see in the videos. They're very well made. It's W2 tool steel. They hold an edge really well. It's a little bit easier to sharpen. So I really enjoy using my chisels. Now, you can buy the antique chisels. You can find them at flea markets. You'll save a lot of money doing it. But that said, you don't know what somebody has done to that chisel. I've come across a lot of them where they look good, and then later to find out the edge chips because somebody took a grinder to them to try to sharpen them. They took the temper out of the edge, and it's not very easy to get back once you do that. So it's something you really want to watch too. If you're at the flea market, you see one that's in good shape. I tend to look for the really older ones. When I do look for them, if you flip them over, you can see the mark where the better steel was forge welded to the iron on top. And also your older chisels were designed with a little bit of a sway back in them. And a lot of times people think they're bent that way. A lot of times that is the way they were made. To be honest with you though, I really prefer my modern chisels over the older ones. They're much lighter. They hold an edge better. I know I'm going to get some hate mail on that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the old ones. That's just something to keep in mind. You may enjoy your experience a little bit more with a newer chisel. Now, when I say enjoy your experience, this is why we list this tool first as my most important tool when I'm talking about timber framing tools. It's because it's the one you're going to use more than anything. You don't need to buy a timber framing slick. You don't need to, you don't need anything fancy. It helps. I have a nice one that was given to me by a viewer. It's a beautiful tool. I use it a lot. But you can get away without it. You can get I use a 2-inch chisel for a lot of my paring and things like that. That's why I like the nice flat back on it. And like I said, I really like my 2-inch chisel. I've used that more than anything in this build. And keep in mind too, when you're getting your chisels, get the proper chisel size for what you're working on. If you're doing a 2-inch mortise, get a 2-inch chisel. If you're doing 1.5 inches, get 1.5 inches, and so forth. Reason being, if it's made well and manufactured well and machined down to specs, it'll be a really good gauge for your joinery. It's a good way to test your mortises, make sure things are going to fit, and so forth. But as you can see, we beat the crap out of this thing, and then we can turn around and smooth things down really well. And if you have that edge sharp, you can plane things down really easily. But to me, this is number one, all the way, every time. So next on our list, we have the framing square. The framing square is a very old tool when it comes to timber framing, and they were using these for a long time. It took somebody, when they started going to the square rule framing methods here in the States, now I could be wrong on this, somebody correct me, but they used to be all different sizes. I mean, you'd still have your right hand angle, it'd still be a square, but the body and the tongue of the square would be different sizes than what you're used to seeing now. Now they are standardized. The tongue of the framing square is 1.5 inches, and the body of the framing square is 2 inches. Those are your most standard sizes for mortises and tenons on a timber frame. It makes layout superbly easy when you're trying to lay out mortises and tenons. So usually if you're going with a square rule layout and you're going 2 inches from the edge, depending on what size your tenon is, to lay out your tenons in your mortise, you can line up the body of the framing square. Just makes it a lot easier. And the other neat thing about it is, when you get one of these framing squares, you want to try to find one that has the table on it. There are a bunch of different construction tables on it. It'll have rafter tables on it. You'll have your brace lengths on it for your brace layout, so it takes all the math out of it for you. You can see the numbers right there on the square. Those are some of the tables. Very handy tool. It's one of the ones too that you want to get to learn how to use. Layout is key on anything you build. It doesn't matter if you're building a birdhouse or if you're building a barn or you're building a house. Layout is important, so you need the right tool for the job. When it comes to timber framing, a framing square is usually the right tool for the job. I mean, you can find other tools like Big Al's and things like that. They're fairly expensive, but they're a really nice tool. You know, the other thing you can do with a framing square, especially one that is the standard framing, timber framing sizes, is they're nice for checking mortises. You can use the body on a 2-inch mortise to check, make sure you've got it big enough, because if that framing square fits in, a 2-inch tenon should fit in. Same thing with the tongue of the framing square, the 1.5 inch section. If you have an 1.5 inch tenon, you should be able to fit it in an 1.5 inch mortise if that tongue of that framing square goes in there. Plus, I've used it many times to clean mortises out, which this one is an aluminum square. Probably not the smartest thing in the world to do, but any of you who've been watching this channel for a long time, you guys know I don't always do the smartest thing, and the record's kind of clear on that. So going along with layout tools besides your tape measure, your bevel gauge, things like that, definitely got to have a good framing square. It just makes everything easier. Plus the 2-inch or the 2 foot long body on that square, when you're working with rough timbers, it's pretty nice to be able to lay a longer straight edge against that, so you know that you're getting that square to that reference edge of the timber. You don't want, you use a speed square or something like that, if you have a little wobble in your milling, it's going to throw the whole joint out, and that's really important to watch for also. So definitely, if you're getting into timber framing, or you're learning, or you want to, invest in a framing square. You can't go wrong. You really need it. You can get them pretty cheap. So definitely one you want to look at. So we're down to the last two that I feel you absolutely have to have. Now I know there's going to be some other things in between that you're going to need. Most of that's things you can make yourself. But one of the real important ones is a good handsaw, at least a good sharp handsaw. You can do so much. You don't need to buy a big circular saw. You don't even need any circular saw. I mean, you think of how our forefathers did it, they did it with handsaws. If you're going to invest in a handsaw for this, I would get 2 of them. Get yourself a ripping saw and get yourself a crosscut saw. Trying to make rips with a crosscut saw is really a pain. You can get these pretty cheap. I mean, this saw you're seeing me using, this one is, I think it's a $25 Stanley saw, 26-inch long crosscut. I really like the Stanley sharp tooths for stuff like this. They're extremely sharp. They cut very smooth. Not very good for ripping though, but excellent for cross cutting. So it's definitely something you're going to want as a decent handsaw. And shop around. I mean, they're pretty cheap nowadays. So moving along, and it's inevitable if you're going to build a timber frame that you're going to need to drill some holes. Now, whether you use a brace and a bit, whether you use a boring machine, or you use an electric drill, corded or cordless, definitely going to need a drill, and you're going to drill a lot of holes. There are times I prefer to use a drill and a Forstner bit to cut mortises over the chain mortiser. Sometimes it just seems like it goes much cleaner. I just enjoy it. I'm not usually big on braces and bits. I have no problem with them. I've just never been big on them. But I will tell you this, a really good sharp bit on a brace and bit setup will run circles sometimes around a cordless drill, and if you got them dialed in right, they're super easy to use. But you definitely need a good drill and good sharp bits, and get the bits you're going to want to get for doing this. You don't want to go to Home Depot or your local hardware store and get the nail eater bits that you see, the ship augers. I use a lot of ship augers, but they have cutters on them, so they sever the wood grains as they go down, and they make a clean cut. Same thing with this Forstner bit I'm using. It does the same thing. Definitely have to be good and sharp. If they're not sharp, you're just going to fight them all the time. Your holes aren't going to come out as clean as you want them to, but definitely have to have a drill. So, also another one you see me using here is a combination square. They're really handy for checking mortise depths, things like that, squaring up the sides of your mortises. They take the place of a mortgage gauge, or mortgage. Jeez, you could tell I'm getting sleepy. They take sometimes they could take place of your mortise gauge. Yeah, definitely getting tired. But so they're really handy. So anyway, I believe I'm going to do this in a 2-part series just because it's getting late and I'm getting kind of beat. But yeah, so anyway, these are the tools you absolutely are going to have. The next one will cover the tools that you really don't have to have. They're not a necessity, but boy, they make the job a lot easier if you have them. It takes very few tools to build one of these, believe it or not. You could do the whole project with hand tools if you wanted to. And really, if the tools are good and sharp and you know how to use them, the work goes really fast. You know, a lot of us are so dependent on our power tools, we'd be totally lost without them. And I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I know how to use the hand tools. I'm learning how to take care of them. But definitely, I could definitely do better with the hand tools. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Probably a lot of droning on for you and all that good stuff, but we're going to keep at it. We'll see what the weather is tomorrow, Thanksgiving. Yeah, I wished you happy Thanksgiving, but actually I'm doing this video the night before. But we'll see what the weather is tomorrow. The Amish don't celebrate Thanksgiving, so I will be over there in the morning getting hopefully the rest of the siding boards for the barn. If you're new to the channel, this is the first time you've seen us, check us out. We've got over 300 videos. Most of them are on timber framing. A lot of the earlier videos were very heavy into teaching, instructional, things like that. And just as we've gone along over time, we've explained things so much, I've turned it more into progress updates. But for those of you who do not like that, you're looking for the instructional and the how-to, or at least how I'm doing this, feel free to check out the videos throughout this vlog, and there is a ton of them. Very in-depth, right down. I mean, they're pretty in-depth. So anyway, have a good night, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next one.